So, a couple more regions of the brain that we need to talk about, and the first one is the cerebellum. Cerebellum is interesting. It is a small part of the brain. It's tucked up under the cerebrum at the very back and base of the skull, so right back here. And it is by far the most neuron dense part of the brain. And what do I mean by neuron dense? It actually has about 80% of all of the neurons that are in the brain. So as you might imagine, it's quite important. It contains both gray matter and white matter. The gray matter tends to be found more towards the outer portion of the cerebellum, as we saw in the cerebrum, and this region of gray matter is called the cerebellar cortex. Cerebellar cortex. Beneath that, you have a dense core of white matter called the arbor vitae. The arbor vitae. That's translated from the Latin, literally means tree of life. We're not going to get too hung up on the internal aspect of this. Your book does an outstanding job going into that. If you want to read it, it will challenge you. It will go into way more depth than you probably need to know. Just understand that it has 4 nuclei buried deeply in there. And those 4 nuclei, of course, have a specific function. We'll get to that in just a minute. It has a deep fissure dividing it longitudinally into 2 halves. And the middle portion is known as the Purkinje cell layer, Purkinje. It's supplied by 3 separate arteries, so it is blood rich. And functionally, it's divided into 3 regions. The cerebrocerebellum, the spinocerebellum, and then finally the vestibulocerebellum, And overall, the main function of this entire thing is coordination of movement. And this can be broken down a bit more. The primary reason here is this controls voluntary movement. Voluntary movement. This includes balance. In other words, so you're able to not fall over both when you walk and even when you're sitting. It receives signals from the vestibular region of the inner ear. Posture would fall under that as well. That's why you're actually able to sit upright, because your body is constantly making small adjustments or movements to keep you upright so you don't literally fall out of your chair. If you've ever tried to get something to sit upright, it doesn't move, it doesn't have a dynamic active system, and it generally falls over. Everybody see that? It also functions in what we call motor learning. Motor learning. You may have heard the term muscle memory. Everybody heard that? This is where it comes from. I love all the beeps and buzzes and clashes and bangs. Having a classroom right above the dumpster is a fun thing. Anyway, back to the cerebellum. Muscle memory essentially means learning to coordinate your use of muscles. Learning to coordinate your use of muscles. This isn't something we really consciously think about. And I cannot emphasize enough the importance of this. You literally could not function without muscle memory. Pretty much the very first thing a baby learns to do is what? How do they get mobile? They crawl. Once they learn to crawl, you gotta keep an eye on them, because they are like worms or snakes. They go everywhere. I think Kylie very emphatically agreed. Working at daycare. Yeah, you cannot let those little toddlers out of your sight. And it gets worse once they learn the second type of thing. Does anybody know what that is? Walking. Yet every one of us remembers how to walk, don't we? That's because of muscle memory. Can that change?
Yes.
Yes, it can. I've had to learn to walk not once, but twice in my life. And let me tell you, the second time took a lot of effort. I didn't exactly time it or count the days, but it was between 9 and 10 months before I could walk again unassisted. I think that's pretty good. But now I walk generally pretty well, don't I? Don't even use my cane. I don't even think y'all see me break it out, have you?
No.
Which is good. When I started teaching here in 22, I had to use it most days. It's just muscle memory allows us to do that. And again, I cannot emphasize how important a skill that is. Most of us think of learning as what we're doing right now. Acquiring, absorbing, integrating knowledge, and remembering that knowledge, right? Building it. And that's definitely important. But what you may not be aware of, the cerebellum of your brain is constantly learning movement, balance, posture, and motion. Once once you have acquired a physical skill, you generally don't forget it. I'm not saying your ability to do it well won't degrade over time. It will, especially if you don't practice it. But how many of you know how to ride a bike? Most of you. Has it been a while since you rode one? But I'd be willing to bet if I brought a bike in, you probably could get up on it. Might be a wobbly the first turn or two with the pedals, but then you can go anywhere you want. All right? Anybody in here ever played tennis? You still remember how to do a backhand, don't you? Did I ever tell y'all that story about me and the backhand? 2 forehands. Well, as a result, for me, learning to do the backhand took a little bit more effort. But I still know how to do it. I can actually play ambidextrously. I told y'all about me and my fencing, didn't I? I can still fence with either hand. I haven't forgotten. I'm not saying I would want to step out on the mat with somebody who just gave me a foil. I wouldn't mind stepping out on the mat against just about any of you if I gave you a foil. Because I don't think many of you have learned how to fence, am I right? Uh-oh.
No, like you're right, we know.
Oh, let me rephrase. But think of all of the things that we do. Believe it or not, something as simple as cutting your food, eating, swinging a hammer, all of that, and I want to make sure you get this down, all of that is done by motor learning in the cerebellum. Motor learning is the process of acquiring the physical skill. That would be a good definition, don't you think? Might even be a good test question. It is the actual physical process of acquiring the skill. How many of you had training wheels on your bike when you started? Most of us. Yes, we were that uncoordinated because we had not done the motor learning necessary to extend our sense of balance on a bicycle. Does anybody here know how to roller skate? Oh wow, just 2 of us.
Not well.
Huh?
Not well.
Not well?
We used to when we were little, but like every time I went back, I had to like refigure it out.
When I was very young, like 8, 9, 10, I learned to roller skate. And it was tough for me, I won't lie. I took way more than my share of falls. My senior year of college, we had to take a PE course, so I took roller skating. Would y'all think I still knew how? And not only did I know how, the instructor taught me how to skate backwards. About 4 years ago, I went out, and believe it or not, I'm still able not only to skate, but to skate backwards.
Even after you forgot how to walk and had to relearn?
Yep. Well, learning to walk took me time, but once I essentially retrained my muscles, it was just like almost resettling back in my body. Pretty wild, isn't it? So does everybody understand what motor learning is? A definition of muscle memory is what you've learned. It is the physical skill itself that you have learned. Once you have learned that skill, it's generally permanent. Like I said, will it degrade over time? Sure. I have aged considerably. I've got damage to my back. We've talked about this. I'm sure I couldn't just step out on the tennis court and start playing. But if I conditioned myself, I know my physical skills are still good enough that I could play a game. I may not win or play well, but you see where I'm going with this. I haven't forgotten how to swing a racket. I haven't forgotten how to throw a football. I haven't forgotten how to catch one. So that is probably the most significant function of the cerebellum, motor learning. Balance and posture I mentioned, but this, again, I don't think people realize how important both of these are as well. You literally could not sit upright without this. Your head would fall over, wouldn't it? Because your head is actually fairly heavy. Now, we've seen the muscles in the neck, we memorized them. You got that big sternocleidomastoid muscle. Allows you to move your head, swivel it, but you still have to use the cerebellum unconsciously to keep it upright. When we talk about posture, that's what we mean. Keeping yourself upright. Sense of balance. Has anybody in here ever gotten car sick? Motion sickness? Vertigo of any kind? Consider yourselves fortunate. If you want to do an experiment and experience motion sickness, I will be glad to put you on a lab stool and spin you rapidly, and then ask you to walk 3 or 4 steps. No takers? That's because of our sense of balance. It allows us to know which way is up and to unconsciously coordinate our movements to keep us up. So make sure you've got that down. Your balance isn't just the movements. We put that under posture. But it is being able to sense up and adjust to it. Both of these are dynamic. They're not static. Does anybody know what I mean by that? It means changing. My posture constantly changes. I bet yours does too, doesn't it? Even sitting there right now, I've noticed Jace is hunched forward over to take notes. Now he's sitting back because I called him on it, and now he's feeling conscious about it. Hey, you sit right in front of me, man. All of that is done by the cerebellum. I think you're starting to see why it's so neuron dense, aren't you? Cerebellum literally means little brain. That's the literal definition of it. But it's so important, I cannot emphasize it enough. Basically, without this, you don't sit upright, you can't move, and you can't coordinate yourself. Here's another interesting one you may not be aware of: cognitive and emotional processing. This isn't a main function like you have in the cerebrum, but we are finding out more and more about it year by year, and we're finding out that both of these involve the neurons in the cerebellum. Everybody got that? That more or less plays a role in neurodegenerative diseases, things like Alzheimer's, dementia, and there's not a lot out there. There's just some research that shows that that's important. And finally, the last one, muscle tone regulation. Muscle tone. What does that mean?
Muscle tone.
Smoothness of movement and coordination. Sure, you all have seen gymnasts and ice skaters do their thing, haven't you? You think they got highly toned muscles? You better believe it. Even before I had my bad back and occasionally had to use a cane, I had trouble walking. I had no muscle tone. My coordination was off. I almost clumsy klutz. One time I fell and the guy said, "Man, that's so embarrassing, even I feel embarrassed." So everybody got that? You understand? Bottom line, cerebellum is there for movement more than anything. What happens if you get it damaged? Stroke, tumor, TBI. Y'all know what TBI stands for? Traumatic brain injury. Blow to the head. Believe it or not, being caught in an explosion. Does anybody know how that causes damage?
Is it like through your ears where,
Huh?
like through your ears the sound?
When something goes boom, it has behind it what we call the pressure wave or the shock wave. It literally pushes air out. Talk about willing suspension of disbelief in Hollywood and all that. I won't lie, this drives me up the wall. In Hollywood, you'll see a big explosion in the background and you see the hero just walking away from it. He wouldn't have walked away from it. That blast wave would have knocked him on his face, and the overpressure of all of the air pushing it out would jar his brain in his skull so much that he probably wouldn't only just fall over, he'd probably be dead. Overpressure is actually what kills most people in explosions. So when I talk about traumatic brain injury, keep in mind it doesn't have to be a direct thump to the head, okay? So here are some of the symptoms from that. Ataxia, A-T-A-X-I-A, and that's just a loss of muscle coordination. You're having difficulty grasping something. Any of you ever heard of occupational therapy? Believe it or not, I had occupational therapy when I first went to the rehab center. They had to reteach me some basic things. Because when you have a severe spinal injury, you don't move as well as you used to. Tremors. Anytime you're messing with the cerebellum, you're messing with movement. So you're going to get just tremors you can't stop. Y'all have seen Parkinson's patients, haven't you? My
So
dad,
as people with Tourette's, does that have to do with that too?
I have no idea. I thought Tourette's is a kind of autism, is that correct? I'll try to look that up for you, Kylie.
I thought it.
Autism itself has, did we talk about learning at all? When you're young, your neurons tend to fire rapidly. Well, let's hold on. We'll get to that after I get through all this, okay? Remind me to talk autism. Is everybody okay with that? Because it's interesting. Okay. Vertigo, V-E-R-T-I-G-O, dizziness. I told you about almost falling off the bluff, didn't I? Damaging my inner ear. Let me tell you something. When you have vertigo, it is one of the worst feelings in the world because you can be laying flat on your back, gripping your bed like this, and the bed is just whirling. Another thing you can get is eye movement problems with your eyes and how they move. I was researching snake bites and snake venom a couple of nights ago, and some of the most venomous snakes on the world have neurotoxins. They primarily kill by causing paralysis of the diaphragm. But even if you treat them with anti-venin, and you can have damage to the cerebellum, and you can literally have one eye that's wandering off this way. You can have drooping of an eyelid on one side. You get an idea here? It is a mixture of symptoms, but we call that just eye movements. Have trouble focusing. And finally, something called dysarthria, D-Y-S-A-R-T-H-R-I-A, dysarthria. Dysarthria just means difficulty speaking. When I first came out of arrest and I was back in my body, I had severe dysarthria. I was trying to communicate, and it sounded like that. It sounded like that to me too, because my mouth wasn't doing what I was telling it to. Well, considering I've been dead for a couple minutes, I think it's kind of understandable. Had a little bit of hiccup in the jump starting to the cerebellum, right? Did y'all get an idea? Main thing to remember is you get damage to the cerebellum, you're going to have difficulty with movement. Any questions about that? Okay, I think we're done with the cerebellum. Y'all okay with that?
You said something about autism as well.
Huh?
You said something about autism as well.
I'll come back to that. We got one more region of the brain we got to talk about. Does anybody know what that is?
Maybe.
Huh?
Maybe.
What do you think it is? Well, we've talked about the cerebrum, haven't we? Talked about the cerebellum, haven't we? What's left?
Is it the brainstem?
The brainstem. Yes, ma'am. Very good. The brainstem is an interesting structure. In many ways, it's kind of a transition from the brain to the spinal cord. And in many ways, it is part of both. Remember though, when I said you got to look at the brain and the spinal cord as one unit, really. We like to split things up to categories, don't we? We're humans. But that is arbitrary. That is arbitrary. I found a really, really good diagram of the brainstem. Looks something like this. Y'all like that one? Y'all want me to post that one on the blackboard?
Sure.
Of course you do. Up there at the top, we've got the thalamus. The thalamus has two lobes, left and right. Oh, no, wait. Yeah, left and right. And it is the main relay station of the brain. It processes both sensory and motor signals traveling to the cerebral cortex. And that by far is its most important function, signal processing and relay. It's the main switchboard between the cerebellum and the muscles. Cerebellum and the muscles. So it coordinates movement as well. Almost all of the sensory information passes through the thalamus. Visual, auditory, taste, touch. The only one that doesn't go through the thalamus is olfaction. Olfaction. Sense of smell. It also regulates sleep and alertness and arousal. Basically, this is what slows your neural activity down so you can go to sleep. After you have been asleep for so long, this is what arouses your neurocognitive activity so you wake up. Since it's the main relay station, in many ways, it's the center of cognition and consciousness. Now, that doesn't literally mean your consciousness resides in your thalamus, okay? I don't want you to think of that. Because your consciousness is the sum total of activity of your brain as a whole. But without the thalamus to coordinate all this, it would be difficult. Pain processing. I said it's the main sensory relay. So it's the main source of pain. Muhammad Ali, I could make a rap about that, but I don't think that way. It doesn't do a lot on its own, but coordinating and sending on all these signals is a critical role. So everybody feel okay with the thalamus? Next up, we've got the midbrain. The midbrain. The technical name for this is the mesencephalon. The mesencephalon. MESENcephalon. Its main function is kind of to be a bridge between the forebrain and the hindbrain. Sounds almost like the thalamus, doesn't it? And it's involved in a lot of the same things. Motor movement control, visual auditory processing, pain modulation. Now notice I said modulation. This can actively suppress pain. It can actively help suppress pain. And again, arousal and wakefulness, alertness. Below that, we have the pons, the P-O-N-S, the pons. This connects the cerebellum to the cerebral cortex. And this is involved in a lot of the autonomic movements. Breathing, swallowing, it also helps control the sleep-wake cycle and facial movement and sensing. Facial movement and facial sensing. Finally, digestion. Most of the major nerves that are connected in the face connect up with the brain through the pons. And how many of you have ever heard of a locked-in syndrome? I'm the only one that's heard of this. How many of you like horror movies? A couple of you. You may not want to listen to this then, because this is, in my opinion, the biggest horror story you've ever heard. Locked-in syndrome is the term given for someone who is in what we call a persistent vegetative state. You may have heard that. You say someone's a vegetable. Well, for the longest time, we actually assumed that the people in this persistent vegetative state were also not conscious. An unfortunate man who had suffered a massive stroke, I believe, was in this persistent vegetative state for years until one of his caretakers noticed that he could do something. He could blink his left eye. Over time, they managed to get a code where he was able to communicate solely through blinking one eye. And it turned out he hadn't been unconscious all those years. He was fully conscious, his brain fully processed every sense. He just had no way to let the world know. I think that would probably be about the worst fate I could possibly imagine on anyone. The guy's name was Jean-Dominique Bauby, and he actually wrote his memoir called The Diving Bell and the Butterfly. Memoir by Jean-Dominique Bauby, former editor-in-chief of the French magazine Elle, who after a massive stroke was left with locked-in syndrome, paralyzed except for his left eye. Using only blinks to communicate, he dictated the book, which described his life being trapped in his body, with only his memories, his imagination. Can you imagine that? Damage to the pond. Everything okay?
Huh?
I says, everything okay?
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on in. No, I'm serious. I appreciate that. Can you at least get part of it? And then below that, we have the medulla. The function of the medulla, and this is at the very base of the brainstem, where it passes through the foramen magnum. The foramen magnum. Y'all remember what that is?
Yeah, it's in the skull. It's that big foramen in the skull.
Yep, it's that big hole at the base of the skull. We are now actually outside of the skull. Remember I said it's just kind of an arbitrary line here. Part of the brain is actually outside the skull. The medulla oblongata controls all of the involuntary functions: breathing, heart rate, blood pressure. Breathing, heart rate, blood pressure. A lot of the unconscious reflex type things like swallowing, blinking, sneezing, vomiting, all of that is because of the medulla oblongata. Those are those basic physical processes that you simply have no control of. You might try to suppress a sneeze, right? You might sneeze into your elbow or something like that, but you can't stop the actual act of trying to sneeze. No matter how long you sit there, you can't go without trying to swallow. No matter how long you sit there staring at somebody, eventually you will blink. We've all vomited at some point. It's not the most pleasant experience, right? But once it comes, it comes. You see where I'm going with this? The medulla oblongata is what controls all of that. Your gag reflex. Everybody okay? So if this area becomes damaged, what happens? Generally, you die.
Is it the whole brainstem or just that part?
Well, this is the most critical part. Generally, though, it's one of the things that makes hanging so effective. If you do the long drop method, it snaps you're basically dead before you even realize it. Madame Guillotine, you're familiar with her? The guillotine, we call it here in Kentucky. Y'all want a fun story that has nothing to do with this? I took French in high school. Got A's. Went off as a freshman to college. Wanted to take French, so I signed up for it. Basic French, which is for people who've never spoken French. Professor gave us a placement test. First part of the placement test was grammar, basics of the language. Second part, on the second day of class, was verbal. As soon as I walked in the door on the second day, she said, "You need to be in the advanced class." I said, "Why?" She said, "You clearly know something about this language. You got 100 on the placement test." And I said, "Yeah, but aren't there 2 parts?" And she said, "Well, yeah, but," and I said, "Well, let's just wait." So she called us up and had us each read a passage to her verbally, one-on-one. And then she'd tell us where we needed to be. I came up there, she gave me the passage. I read it. I looked at her and said, "Well," she said, "you're right where you need to be." I said, "That bad, huh?" She said, "You want me to be honest?" I said, "Please." She said, "I've never heard French spoken with a hillbilly accent before." Parlez-vous français? But I did learn to speak it properly, thanks to her. Y'all want to hear another funny follow-up to that? Went off to grad school about 3 or 4 years later. My roommate ends up being from Spain. One day he's typing an email to his parents, and the way our desks were sitting up, I was almost looking over his shoulder. So I started just, he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I wanted to see if I could understand what you're writing." He said, "Go ahead and say it." So I read this entire paragraph of Spanish, and when I got done, Antonio burst out giggling. And I said, "Was it that bad?" And he said, "No." He said, "Your pronunciation was excellent." I said, "What is so funny?" He said, "You sound like a Frenchman." So anyway, y'all feel comfortable with the brain as a whole. One thing I want to bring up is a terrible condition called hydrocephalus, which literally means waterhead. Are you familiar with that? Does anybody know where I'm going with this? There are some infants that are essentially born alive without a brain. Now, how could they be born alive without a brain? Well, the brain stem is present. Remember I said that was essentially an extension of the spinal cord. So these poor infants are born alive. Their brainstem is present and functional, which means their vital signs are also present and functional. And I was wrong. The term is anencephaly. 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 Does anybody need me to repeat that?
Yes.
Anencephaly. And essentially, this is just due to a birth defect. You've got in the early embryo what they call the neural tube, which is what develops into the brain and the rest of the central nervous system. If that fails to close, then essentially this child will develop with a brain stem but no brain. And as you might imagine, that is a terrible, terrible thing, because the only way for them to be kept alive is essentially through machines. So, not a pleasant experience, but you all are going to be going into the medical profession, and I think you need to be aware of some of the possible outcomes and things. So, any questions at all about the central nervous system? Okay, stand and stretch and take about a 30-second break. 30 seconds does not mean walking out the door. It means you get a chance to literally stretch, because we all need that at this point. Plus, for this one, I actually do need to go back to the book. People ask me how to study this. I will be posting all of the lectures that I've got that I haven't posted online tomorrow on my YouTube channel. So they should be there for you as you go through your studying over the next week and a half. If you don't see them, feel free to text me by, say, closing time tomorrow. And by closing time, I mean like 5, 6 o'clock. I also plan on posting all grades in Blackboard tomorrow. All 3 exams, the lab exam, the lab weekly exercises, the quizzes that we've done in lab, the weekly lectures from weekly grades from lecture activities. I plan on posting all of that. If it's not up tomorrow night, it will be up Saturday, but it should be done tomorrow, okay? I figured that would be good so everybody knows exactly where you're heading going into the final. I'm automatically going to assume that next week's weekly exercise will be automatic for both of you, okay? Or for all of you, for both lecture and lab. So you're not going to be wondering where those last 20 points are. They will be included. Does that sound good to everyone? Any questions on that? All right, so let me call up McGraw-Hill here. Okay, so we finished chapter 11. Let me make sure. Let me talk a little bit about the spinal cord first. The spinal cord. So the spinal cord is considered everything from the foramen magnum on down. Everything from the foramen magnum on down. The foramen magnum being the big hole. That's literally what it means. You may want to get that down if you don't. If y'all want to see a really good diagram of this, it's on electronic page 145 physical page 417, figure 11.14. Everybody see that? I want to point out a couple of anatomical features of the spinal cord. If you look on the right side, you'll see the cervical enlargement. Does everybody see that? Notice how much wider and thicker the spinal cord is there. It's not just a thin tube that goes all the way down. It has a couple of thickenings in it, doesn't it? Does anybody know why it's there? Want to take a guess? It's the neck, right? What comes out from that region? Oh dear, I'm waving them. You see these two things sticking out? They're called arms. Oh yeah, them things. The cervical enlargement essentially is that way because all of the nerves from the muscles and the senses in the arms are feeding into that. Does everybody see that? So obviously you're going to need more nervous tissue there to coordinate those nerves feeding in. Take a look down there at the bottom. Do you see another thickening? It's called the lumbar enlargement. I'll give Davin one guess as to what the lumbar enlargement coordinates. Don't feel bad. I was waving my arms and I couldn't figure out the cervical enlargement. What do you think it is, Jace?
Maybe your legs.
The legs, imagine that. Yep, those legs sticking out. And thanks for being here. He told me, so does everybody see that? I want to make sure that you're aware of those because they do play a special role. So make sure you know that both the cervical and the lumbar enlargements coordinate the respective limbs at that level. The spinal cord itself is divided into segments. Basically where each vertebra is. And feeding into each of these 31 segments are a pair of what we call spinal nerves. Yes, you do need to know this. The spinal nerves are the ones that feed out from that segment. Everybody got that? Now keep in mind, you also have two nerves feeding in above the top vertebra, the top cervical vertebra. So you've got 8 pairs of cervical nerves, 7 pairs of vertebrae in the cervical region. Below this region, they're named after the vertebra that's above them. So you've got 12 pairs of thoracic, 5 pairs of lumbar, 5 sacral nerves, and 1 pair of coccygeal nerves, C-O-C-C-Y-G-E-A-L. If you look below the lumbar enlargement in that figure, you'll also see the conus medullaris, That corresponds to the region where the coccyx is. Some people consider it to be part of the lumbar enlargement. I'm okay with you calling it that or taking it separately. So everybody got that? Any questions over this? Essentially, each of these pairs of nerves coordinates functions on that side of the body at that level, on that side of the body at that level. So you've got senses feeding in from both sides, right and left, and you've got motor neurons feeding out from both sides, right and left. Questions? Alrighty, let's see, I think that's got it. Did we talk about the peripheral nervous system,
The PNS?
the PNS?
Yeah, we talked about it.
Okay.
You were gonna talk about autism.
Huh?
You were gonna talk about autism.
Okay. Autism. As when we are born, essentially, all of our neurons that are interconnected don't form concrete specific pathways. The way a memory is formed is when a specific circuit of neurons is repeatedly stimulated by the same stimulus. I had to repeatedly remind myself of your name while looking at your face so that I would have a memory of who you are. And I think I can ID all of you at this point. Those of you who are here anyway. Those two people who sit in the back who are never here, not sure I remember their names. So everybody understand how a memory forms? But you have to try out multiple circuits of neurons to get them to form that path. Does everybody see that? Like I look at my two students here, and I don't know which is Axel, which is Devin, and which is Jason on day one, right? The only one I knew was Axel because I've had him in class before. But I knew I had three male, right? So I didn't search the rest of my brain in memory when I'm looking at the names. I wasn't looking for female faces in my memory or female names on the list. I was looking for stereotypical male names. Does everybody see how this goes? How did I selectively do that? How did I selectively trim off the pathways that led to female? Well, the answer is learning. We call this neural pruning. And I see one person, two people writing it down. It may also be called synaptic pruning. In other words, my brain learns early on, this path is male, this path is female. So when I start searching my memory, I'm not searching all of my memory. Does everybody see that? I'm searching only men I know or only women I know. And what that does is it means you end up with a lower synaptic density. A lower synaptic density. In other words, your synapses, the connections, aren't as numerous. That's a good thing. You're not using the excess brain power to search them. I'm sure we've all used an old computer at some point in time, haven't we? And you've seen how it literally takes measurable time for it to search through everything. So what we call this, essentially, synaptic pruning is a heuristic search method. Heuristic, H-E-U-R-I-S-T-I-C. A heuristic search method. It literally means you don't search everything. you only search the most likely thing. Everybody see how that works? When I think about how to get from here to my vehicle, so after class, I'm going to go grab my lunch out of my vehicle and go up to my office and eat it. I'm sure y'all have heard my stomach grumbling. I'm thinking about that, right? How many different pathways do I have out of this building? You immediately had to stop and think, didn't you? There are two doors, one at this end, one at this end. If Desiree was here, she could tattle on me, but I'll tell you, I tend to park in the Stoner lot. Do you think I'm going to think about that door? You think I'm going to think about that interest at all? It completely does not even register in my thought processes. Does everyone understand this? So I immediately think of going out that door, don't I? Now I park in the back lot, not the side lot. I have two ways to get to my vehicle. They're both about the same. I could go down, turn left, and then turn right and go down this long sidewalk past Stoner and then turn right and go around. Or I could cut across the grass, go behind here and go there. Well, which way am I going to go? Immediately I'm going the shortcut, right? Because I'm hungry and I want my chow. You see how this works? That's what synaptic pruning is. In people who are, I think the technical term is neurodivergent. You heard that?
Mm-hmm.
Very often, they exhibit less synaptic pruning. They therefore have more connections than a neurotypical brain. Their synaptic density is higher.
Is that why they get like overstimulated very easy and stuff?
Very.
It's 'cause they
That definitely plays a role in overstimulation because they are essentially being bombarded by extra information. Everybody see how that works? A lot of it has to do with timing, developmental timing. It also means that they end up having more connections for memory, attention, not just sensory processing. Can lead to hyper-awareness. Intense focus. And in some cases, increased cognition. Now, I'm just giving you a very, very broad and generalized idea behind this. It's not necessarily the cause of autism or the cause of all forms of autism or anything like that. So don't be drawing stereotypes, but I hope that this might give you a better understanding of the neurological background of why people who are autistic think and act the way they do. Their brains are literally wired a little bit different than a neurotypical person. And like so many things, it has something, some of it has advantages, some of it have disadvantages. It's not medical advice. Don't be self-diagnosing or something. So any questions about synaptic pruning? I just wanted to bring that up because there seems to be an awful lot of misinformation out there, to the point where I actually get kind of angry at some of the people, some of the things they're spouting, because it's just outright lies. Okay. How many of you would like to have 10 extra minutes of lab study time? Raise your hand. We'll call it there. We'll finish with chapter